defense attorney at Alexander Montano Attorneys. James, thank you very much for coming in. Yeah, just to go back, the person who opened the door for the psychiatric observation was the defense, in a way, because their witness at the time had said Oscar suffers from this generalized anxiety disorder, and the prosecution, the state, then said he must go for mental observation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it obviously was only a month ago. It doesn't feel like 30 days ago. It feels like an age ago. But if we look back at it, yes, that's exactly what happened. Their expert raised this spectre, perhaps accidentally so, and it was then the state, as the Gerinal himself said, he said, you know, he is also, not only is he a prosecutor, but he's also a person that must ensure that justice is done. And that's the reason why I believe the state was pushing for him to be observed, so that in the future it might not, that they would not be in a position to argue that he did not receive a fair trial.
What can we expect to come out of this report? So far, it's under wraps. We're waiting for the trial to resume. But just judging by how the trial has been going, what should we be expecting?
Look, I don't think it will be controversial, if I can put it like that. So I think if it was going to be particularly controversial and they would have said something that we would have found surprising, say, for example, they'd found that he did suffer with some kind of serious mental issue, I believe they might have asked for a longer period of observation, that they would be within their rights to do so. Or they might have notified the defense or the state well in advance that they might need more time. But that hasn't been the case. Or we can't say that it hasn't been the case, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
Let's say the report comes back and confirms that he's got some anxiety disorder of sorts, okay? How does that benefit the defense's case?
Well, in many ways it depends on the intensity of it, let's put it like that. Is if, for argument's sake, they say, yes, he does suffer from this generalized anxiety disorder, but it hasn't necessarily affected his ability to determine the difference between right and wrong. Then the trial continues as it is, and they then might use this determination, this clinical finding, perhaps at a later stage for mitigation, to say, well, look, the clinical finding has suggested he suffered from this generalized anxiety disorder, which hasn't necessarily, shall we say, totally diminished his capacity, but they might be in a position to argue at a later stage, let's call it sentencing, that for a slightly lesser sentence, because he has been observed and said he suffers from this. So his reactions might not necessarily have been, shall we say, entirely without this influence of this generalized anxiety disorder.
How do you think Gerinal, the prosecution, I know you're a defense attorney, but if you were in his boot, how do you think he would use, now going forward, this report? Let's say it says he's got a disorder. How would the prosecution use it?
Well, look, how would the prosecution use it? They would probably try to, shall we say, lessen the impact of the report if it says, yes, he does have this generalized anxiety disorder, because that might well go towards, shall we say, assisting Mr. Pistorius in his version, in saying that he had this genuine fear. So perhaps the state might prefer to sort of, shall we say, not brush it under the carpet, but to say, well, yes, he's been evaluated, but it hasn't had such an impact on his life that it would have influenced his thinking, let's say.
Yeah, the other factor that has come in is that was he acting out of fear on the night, Valentine's Day last year, when he shot and killed River Steenkamp? Because, you know, the crime issue has come up, that the place has been broken into. Or was he really acting deliberately out of anger? That's also, maybe this report might help to clarify that.
Yes and no. Look, at the end of the day, that's the state's position versus the defense's position. Acting out of fear versus acting out of a rage. Unfortunately, the psychiatric assessment isn't going to go backwards in time and tell us this is what happened at the time. They can only assess him and saying, well, he either suffers from this or he doesn't. So at the end of the day, it's not going to be able to shed more light on the problem which the judge is faced with. Does she believe the state's contention or the defense's contention? Because that's more a factual inquiry than anything else. But it might shed some light into the way he was thinking, or perhaps even go so far as to say what were the psychological factors which influence his thought process, not necessarily on that night, but, you know.
Just in general?
In general, yes, it might well be.
Okay, no, thank you very much. That's James Aveyard, defense attorney at Alexander Montano Attorneys.
Know more. eNCA.com